Did you know that horses produce about 50 pounds of manure a day? That's 8 tons a year. So we decided to take our 24 tons of manure and turn it into amazing fertilizer for our hobby farm and our neighbors' gardens. Fortunately for you, we've learned a lot about composting the last couple of years. So let's talk about number 1, how to compost and why you would want to. Number 2, our biggest failures and biggest wins, so you don't have to make your own. And number 3, how to troubleshoot what's happening in your compost pile.
So what are the actual steps to composting and using a bin system? Step number 1, gather your manure. Now the good news is if you do this on a daily basis, this is the number one best thing you can do to keep your fly and parasite populations down. Step 2 is managing your pile. Now, when you add your manure, it's probably going to be the right amount of moisture, but you may need to add moisture as you go throughout the time. We'd like to turn our pile over once a week. However, you will know your pile needs to be turned judging by the temperature. If it's above 150 degrees or below 110 degrees, it's time to turn it. We turn our pile because our little microbes and bacteria don't just need water, they also need oxygen to keep activated. And we want them to heat up for at least 3 days and keep the temperature of the pile above 131 degrees to kill off parasites and any seeds from weeds. Step 3 is to move your piles. We have 3 bins and we move the piles over to the left as we progress. We have found that if you get your best turning over when you move the whole pile to the left. Move that pile into the next bin and then start a fresh pile in your first bin. Step 4 is allowing time for processing. We'll talk more about that in the nailed it and failed it section. Step 5 is to use your compost. Both our neighbors love to have it for their garden, and we like to use it for our garden too. We're also going to start spreading on our lawn with a manure spreader. How do you know when your compost is done? Your finished compost will smell earthy and be cool to the touch. Let's talk about what we learned over the years, where we nailed it and where we failed it. Our number 1 win was working with our local soil and water conservation district. They were fantastic and even paid for 75% of our compost bin. Our next thing we did right was figuring out where we were going to put the compost bin before we started building. You want it close to water, a central location for your chore ease, easy access for your shared finished compost, and then a lot of legal requirements that are listed here. Plus, make sure you have plenty of room for where your tractor is going to maneuver. And our biggest fail? Somehow I totally missed the instructions that said you may need to add water to your pile to keep it at 50% water. That first hot summer, I let my pile dry out and all of the processing stopped. And then my worms moved out. It was just a big old pile of dusty manure balls. Our next big mistake was not making our bins big enough. Let's take some math. You have 10 yards of manure per horse per year. So all you have to do is multiply your number of horses by 10 yards and that'll give you total yards of manure that you need. To give you a rough idea, a 12 foot by 12 foot by 4 foot high bin will hold about 21 yards of manure. That all sounds good, but we didn't think about storage. You can't spread your manure if the ground is sodden or frozen. So for us, that was about 6 months of storage per year that we had not considered. So why would you want to compost anyway? Well, number 1, it can save you a lot of money. It can be pretty expensive to have your manure hauled away. And number 2, it's fantastic for the environment. It keeps contaminated runoff out of our water systems and keeps poop out of our landfills. Not to mention that there's pretty good evidence that you can have a lot better fertilizer when it's done naturally rather than synthetic. So let's talk about troubleshooting. Here's a handy chart from the Pierce Conservation District in Washington on how to troubleshoot what is happening in your pile. Thanks so much for dropping by today. Please subscribe to our channel to learn more about horses and property management, and come to bridlesandbreath.com to sign up for our monthly newsletter and learn about our online courses.